Well, good afternoon, everybody. Oop, it's pretty loud, sorry. That was a great lunch, wasn't it? I think we should give the cooks, hopefully they'll hear us. Wasn't the food great? Let's give them a hand. So, so I'm just going to take about 5 minutes and talk a little bit about Pawpaws here at Kentucky State University. Now, I always ask this question, how many people out here have tasted a pawpaw? Okay, now here's the tricky question. How many of you liked it? Good, okay, that's good. Sometimes people have that first, encounter with pawpaw, with a wild pawpaw fruit, and it's like not so good, and it's hard to overcome that, so it's good that you've had some good fruit. So at Kentucky State University, I've been working with pawpaws for about 26 years actually here at K-State, and I ventured into administration for the last 12 years, so I was also doing dean's stuff and that, but now I stepped down in December, and so I'm back to full-time pawpaw and other fruits here at K-State, and so looking forward to really focusing on those activities again. And we've had a good run here. The Kentucky State University has the only full-time pawpaw program in the United States. And it's a great opportunity for you to come out here, learn more, come out and visit us in the orchards. We're going to have 3 dates. The one's going to be kind of to be determined, but 3 dates you can think about. One is May 3rd, we're going to have a grafting workshop, and it is something you have to register for. If you go onto Facebook for the KSU Land Grant page, you'll find it there. And also there's a KSU Pawpaw Facebook page, right? So go KSU Pawpaw, you'll see it on there, so you can register. But basically you'll get an opportunity to learn how to graft pawpaws. We'll have some trees that you can graft and take home with you, so with some of the varieties. So it's a great opportunity, so we'll post that soon for you to be able to register. That's May 3rd. And then September 19th is, we have this Third Thursday program here at K-State. And so if you come out, it's a whole day. How many folks have been to a Third Thursday? I should ask that, Sue. Not too many. So if you come out, it starts about 10 o'clock. We'll have a number of presentations about pawpaw, have lunch, and then go on tour in the orchards in the afternoon. And so if you like to taste some pawpaws, we usually have some tasting events, some processing events too at those. So that's September 19th. And then a little further off in 2025, I'm happy to announce we're going to be having the 5th International Pawpaw Conference here at Kentucky State University. And so I'm sure Blake is going to be speaking at that one too. But it's going to be a great event. And in the previous international conference we had folks, there were folks growing pawpaws all around the world. Italy, Netherlands. There's a number of different nurseries that we've contracted with in France and Germany that are selling pawpaws over there. So there's a lot of folks in the world growing pawpaws, and this is a great opportunity for you to come and taste some of those varieties. So just a little bit about pawpaw. There's about maybe 50, 60 varieties of pawpaw, and a lot of them have been around a long time. And sometimes we get kind of hooked on heirloom things, and heirlooms can be really great, but there's also a reason why heirloom maybe varieties are not grown anymore, because they weren't resistant to certain diseases or they had some other problems, right? So there are some, I'm not going to call them heirloom pawpaws, but there's some pawpaw varieties that have been out there a long time, like Wells and Tay2 and Taylor, and a lot of people are really interested in those. But the reality is that almost everything that we're selling right now that's recently released is better than those varieties because they're bigger, they taste better. And so there is some, reason to if you'd like to try some of those that were, basically selected 30, 40 years ago. But the selections that that Blake is selling, the ones that have been developed here at K-State, the ones that Neil Peterson has developed, they're just far superior to some of those other older varieties. And you got to think about that before you go and maybe spend a lot of money to put in some older varieties. So if you want to test some of those, we can have you test some of those, taste some of those next Third Thursday. So Chappelle is a KSU release, and I think Blake's been selling all 3 of ours, Atwood, Chappelle, and I'm going to forget Benson, and so it's a really nice pawpaw. It's only about 5% seed, really a nice variety. And just like there's apples, there's name varieties of pawpaw, right? And so they're clonally propagated. You know, we've been cloning in horticulture a long time, right? We take a bud and we put it onto a rootstock, and the bud grows out into the tree, and now you've got a replicate of the original tree, right? And it also then has the same fruit characteristics as that tree that the bud came from. Otherwise, you know, if it's just like your kids, right? A seedling, you never know what you're going to get. It could be really good, maybe not so good, right? So it's a way of guaranteeing that if you're willing to spend the money on grafted trees, you're going to get a really good pawpaw if you pay that money. And some are not patented, so they can be propagated yourself, but some are patented, like the Neil Peterson selections. And this is Casey Benson, which is another very round pawpaw, very, very round, and I like it a lot. It's very pretty, and it's an earlier pawpaw, so it's kind of in order. Benson's kind of the first one to ripen, maybe in early September. Chappelle's a little later, and then Atwood is kind of a little later also, and it might be the latest. Maybe it's mid-September, but they're all going to start ripening. Basically, they're going to flower in April, and as long I've been here 26 years. Flowering is like 2 weeks earlier now than it used to be. I'm seeing climate change. I think but we're seeing a change in the weather because it used to be in April 20th or so I'd see pawpaws flowering. Now it's more like April 10th or somewhere in there where we're seeing it flower. Sometimes they get frosted out, but pawpaws do tend to flower in the same tree over quite a long time period. So anyways, you also get then different ripening times and these different varieties. And if it's like anything else with apples. Some people love Honeycrisp. Some people, I'm going to say this, like Red Delicious. I don't know why, but they'll like Red Delicious. So just like that, if you should plant a number of different pawpaw trees because they need to cross-pollinate, right? And that you'll get the best fruit set. We've done some work on that. Many of them will self to a low level, so you maybe don't need another pawpaw tree next to them of genetically different, but some are truly self-unfruitful. They won't. There's one in front of the Franklin County Extension Office, a single pawpaw tree that we gave them a long time ago. It never has a fruit because there's no other pawpaw tree nearby, and so it just never has any fruit. I've been tempted to go over there with a paintbrush and put some pollen on some of those flowers, but it is something to think about. And if you want to get fruit, you're going to need to pollinate. And then you're also going to have some of those fruit drop. There's a fruit drop that happens every year. We get a lot of phone calls. I've got hundreds of little fruit, and now there's only a few left. Well, that's kind of the natural thing. There's a fruit drop in apples too. We do lose some of those fruit. Now I'm excited. Now I'm kind of Sherry Crabtree and Jeremy Lowe and I have been working on pawpaws a long time. That's Sherry. We've actually planted about 1,000 trees down here, which are the direct result of crosses between certain varieties, and many of them are Neil Peterson selections crossed by sunflower, and that's the variety named sunflower. And some of his are like Potomac and Susquehanna, which is a really good one. And so if we cross those with each other, and then we planted out the seedlings. So one of my great joys now of stepping down is I get to go out and sample these trees because they're about 5 years old now, 4 years old, so they're producing fruit. So maybe the next big pawpaw variety release will come out of some of those. That's what I'm hoping. So just a little bit more, you can take a look at the orchard over here on the other side. We do grow them out in full sun. You can grow them in your wooded areas too. And Blake can tell you a little bit about that, but it's, we grow them out in full sun. As long as the trees are about 1.5 feet tall, you don't have to worry about them surviving. I've got a couple of graduate students right now. We've been looking at that timing of flowering and whether how many chilling units are required to actually have a variety flower. We've been looking at which ones cross best, and then we've been doing a lot of breeding, and so that's kind of the things we've been doing. And I just wanted to remind you, even if you don't want to put some pawpaw trees out at your farm, if you're a homeowner, put some out. You're going to have not only fruit, but you can have this zebra swallowtail butterfly, because it's the caterpillar. That's the only leaf that it will eat. That zebra swallowtail butterfly. It's exclusive food for that particular butterfly. So if you see that butterfly, you know you've got pawpaws nearby too. So just a little bit, hopefully you'll be able to come out third Thursday and see us. We grow a lot of pawpaws also in the greenhouses, and we really also have a number of different speaking events. And this was actually how many folks went to the Louisville Pawpaw Festival? There was actually a Louisville Pawpaw Festival. I was so happy, and there's been an Ohio one that literally has like 6,000 people go to it each year now. And it was really well attended, and so I'm hoping that we're going to be able to see that continue to grow. And here's Blake at his stand too. And it's a great opportunity for folks to get together, taste pawpaw, have pawpaw beer, those types of things. So I think they're talking about maybe a bigger venue over in Louisville next year. But I think it's great, also another opportunity for you guys to go and learn more about pawpaw. So I didn't want to take too much time, but I just wanted to have you be aware that there's pawpaw going on here at K-State, and it's a really important crop for us because we think that small farmers, there's a lot of opportunity for them out there for that. Something unique, something chefs would want. There's pawpaw brandy being made in the fermentation distillation industry. Jeff Creed is selling a pawpaw brandy. So there's a lot of opportunity to sell the fruit and the pulp. So one or two questions, and I'll turn over to Blake. Okay, we have one question here.
What do people usually sell them for? What's the price for a pound?
Okay, what do people sell for? Usually it's about $3 to $4 a pound, and a lot of times people will sell large fruit for $1 or $2, right? And it's about $3-4 a pound. Yep.
At the Ohio Pawpaw Festival
Yeah.
this past season, there was such a shortage of pawpaws due to the frost. They were selling them for $35 a pound.
That's an opportunity. Yeah, I think Neil Peterson sold at DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C. at one point too. He was selling for $7 a pound quite a long time ago. It kind of depends on where you're selling, right? And that's another opportunity. I think there's one more question.
Expand a little bit on the full sun versus not thing. I actually put some in kind of edge of.
Oh, yeah. So, it's like any other tree fruit. If they are in full sun, they're going to have more energy to set fruit, right? Now, I'm going to say, if you drive by our trees up here, being in full sun isn't always the best thing. And Greg Rieger, who's at Clemson, and I talk about this. It's kind of almost hedge culture because we get these, they're a native understory tree and we're growing them in full sun. And if you do have the rows for alleys fairly close together, there's a little partial shading during the day. That's probably not a bad thing. But if they're shaded too much of the day, they're not going to have enough energy to set as much fruit. And that's why sometimes in wild stands, people will clear out the overstory, the other bigger trees, so that those understory pawpaws will get more light and produce more fruit. So, well, I think there's one more person waving, but we got to stop. Okay. So, okay. Well, thank you very much, and I'll be around afterwards if you have a few more questions too. And now Blake is going to come up and talk to you about how to grow pawpaw. He's got a great nursery that he's going to tell you about too, I think, and a very knowledgeable person about pawpaw. And thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Dr. Pomper, for that. And he pretty much covered everything. So thank you all for coming today, and say goodbye on your way out. So is this the controller here? This is different. Oh, it's this one here. So this is just kind of a basic primer on pawpaws. And I don't often tell this story, but I was about 16 or I was 18 years old, and I was at a church camp in Indiana, and I had an interest in trees and wild foraging and things like that. I was 18 a long time ago, and there was this little tree with these funny little green balls hanging off of it, and this was in June. And I was like kind of observing this tree, and I had no idea what it was. And there was a woman there, and she was like, and I was like, do you know what these are? And she was like, oh, them are pawpaws. And I was like, pawpaws? I was like, can you eat this fruit? And she was like, yeah, and it's good. I was like, seriously? And so then I was determined to find a pawpaw tree with fruit on it. So I finally found them in a local park in Louisville. I had like one fruit. I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And then now I run a nursery company, and I focus on pawpaws as one of my main products. I ship pawpaws all over the world, pawpaw seeds all over the world. And so it's just neat because you never know. You make one comment to a young person, and you have no idea how that's going to inspire them or affect them for the rest of their life. So let me introduce you to our nursery. It's Peaceful Heritage Nursery, LLC. We're a naturally grown farm. I was formerly certified organic. My practices are still organic, under organic standards, but I'm no longer certified. We trial and grow over 20 species of fruits and nuts. We raise over 150 cultivars. Most of those cultivars, I'd say, are pawpaws at this point. I also raise honeybees. And we're always searching for superior performing fruit plants to add to our nursery. So we operate a local pickup and mail order specialty nursery, shipping all over the USA. So I only do about 10% of my business in-state, 90% around the country. And I supply Sustainable Berea, Good Foods Co-op in Lexington, and once supplied Baker Creek seeds with products. Those were actually pawpaw seeds. I think they felt that they were too much to handle because they have to stay moist, and it's like most seeds don't have to stay moist to survive. But it's our aim to supply local families, farms, and homesteads with superior genetics, excellent plants, accurate information, and honest service. And this is my book, Pawpaws, the Complete Growing and Marketing Guide. So that's available in soft cover or ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and then please purchase a new copy as that supports my work. And I believe they have copies for sale out here, and apparently they want me to sign them later, so you can do that too. And my second book is The Berry Grower, and that's also available online as an ebook or paper copy. So these are some of the basic questions we're going to be looking over today. So I'm not going to sit there and read them all. We'll just go into it. Oh, and that's a picture. Those are KSU grown pawpaws right there. All right, introduction to pawpaws. So pawpaws are native trees in the family Annonaceae. Other known family members include a large number of tropical fruits, such as cherimoya, guanabana, etc. They're in the order of Magnoliaceae. So they're actually related distantly to magnolia trees, and you can see that in the foliage and in the flowers. If you look closely, you'll see a lot of resemblance there, including the buds on the twigs. So they have a strong resemblance in both tree form and fruit characteristics of tropical fruit, and that's, of course, really cool and really desirable for a lot of people. And the fact that they're resilient native trees, they grow easily compared to conventional fruit trees like apples and peaches. So I'm in the same boat as KSU. Most of my peaches got the chainsaw disease over the years. They're actually North America's largest edible fruit. So North America's largest fruit is hedge apple or Osage orange. It's not edible, but it's a little bigger than pawpaws. So they're a small tree that forms large thickets via underground suckers. So typically in cultivation, they're trained to a single trunk and not allowed to sucker. An individual trunk has a lifespan of around 20 to 25 years or so. Thus, a pawpaw tree's viable production is for around 17 to 20 years, because obviously it takes a few years to get into production. And so a grafted tree, you're going to see around 17 to 20 years of production at best. So a non-grafted pawpaw seedling has a much longer lifespan if allowed to sucker and form multiple trunks continuously. So pawpaws are native to most of the eastern USA, from the Gulf areas to Michigan, New York State, extending even into southern Ontario. Westward, they extend to around Iowa and Kansas, and in recent times, people push their range into Vermont and along the West Coast. Famously, the Lewis and Clark expedition credited wild pawpaws with saving their exploration party from starvation. And there's a dwarf pawpaw called the pygmy pawpaw, Asimina parviflora, that's found in southern Georgia to Florida. It does not produce a desirable fruit and grows only about 2 to 4 feet tall. So it's important to note that pawpaws are not a tropical species. They are cold hardy, but they're a temperate tree that requires a substantial chill period in the winter. It's cold hardy at about -20. So we're going to talk about wild pawpaws a little bit here. So wild pawpaws, they grow throughout Kentucky and are found on many rural properties. Their natural habitats typically riparian zones and edges of forest. They also can be found along hiking trails in parks where they get more sunlight. They can grow in the shade of larger species such as tulip poplars and oaks. Many groves such as this one in Cherokee Park in Louisville, Kentucky are clonal stands with little genetic diversity. Okay, so I get asked this a lot. People will say, why I have 50 pawpaw trees, why don't I get any fruit? So there's two main reasons for that. When there's little genetic diversity present, there's also little fruit production. So the fact that this is a clonal stand means that there might only be 2 or 3 different genetically different pawpaw trees present, although it looks like there's 40 trees here, like they sucker underground, so they'll make multiple trunks.
That was going to be my question. So when you say clonal, the natural process
Is to sucker. So one tree can produce 20 or 30 trunks or more in due course of time and appear to be many different trees, but it's just one.
And is there, can you speak a little bit to why you want to manage that for production?
Yes, and if you all have any questions, just feel free to ask them as we go along. So basically, the tree, and we'll go into pollination a little bit later, but the trees have to have cross-pollination. So it's okay if you allow a non-grafted tree to sucker, there's no problem with that, but you have to have other genetically different pawpaw trees present so that you have pollination happening. Okay, so shaded conditions also reduce fruit set. So wild pawpaw fruit typically ripens in September and is quickly eaten by wild mammals such as possums and raccoons. So that's another reason why you don't see it too much, because it drops on the ground and animals very quickly find it. It's fragrant, they can smell it. So some wild pawpaws are large and delicious. However, most wild fruit is only going to be a few ounces and contain many large seeds with generally mediocre quality. So this is kind of a typical wild pawpaw on the bottom. That's a cultivated variety on the top. Which one would you rather eat? So if you want top-notch fruit quality, you need superior genetics. And that's going to be found in cultivated selections or hybrids for the most part. So how to start growing pawpaws, choosing a location. So I hope you all enjoy this amazing artwork I did. Pawpaws grow well in most locations in Kentucky. Most urban locations and suburban backyards are typically ideal because they're typically going to have decent sun exposure, really good drainage of water, and they're also going to have a lot of windbreak because of all the buildings and trees that are around. So they need as much sun as possible. Well-draining soil, at least 3 to 4 feet deep, in a location that's not in a frost pocket. So basically, in this drawing, you can see the top area is going to be too steep and windy. The middle of the slope, where there's full sun, is going to be pretty ideal. The lower part is going to be more frost prone and also in the shade, and also has a high water table, which is common in a lot of places in Kentucky. So again, if you're planning on a slope or on a rural site, you're going to want to avoid the low areas because these are frost pockets, right? Because warm air rises, cold air sinks. So that cold air is going to go downhill and settle in the low areas. So a lot of times people say, well, I have a creek or a river at the bottom of my land and I want to put in pawpaw trees down there. And I generally don't think that's a very good idea because, one, it's going to be too shady, and two, the cold frosty air is going to tend to settle down in the low areas. And when cold air, when you have frosty areas, that's going to increase the likelihood that the blossoms are going to get frosted. And so when the trees are in bloom, the flower buds, when they're open or close to being open, are very susceptible to frost damage. So that's a big issue. So you want to put the trees where they're going to have the least likelihood of getting frost damage. And it'll also burn new shoots. So that can eliminate the crop for the entire year. So again, the optimal planting zone is going to be around the middle of the slope, not up top where you have thinner soils and it's more windy and exposed, and not at the bottom where it's going to be a frost pocket. So I get asked this a lot too. Don't forget, you need at least 2 genetically different pawpaw trees in order to have fertilization of flowers, and that's a fruit crop. So that could be 2 seedlings, that could be 2 different named grafted cultivars, or 1 or more of each. So 1 grafted tree, 1 seedling, etc. So this is something that causes people to slip up a little bit. So if this is confusing to anybody, feel free to ask questions, but I'm going to explain this. So with pawpaw trees, when you open the fruit and you get the seed, and you plant the seed, every single seedling you plant is going to be genetically unique. It doesn't matter if it came out of the same fruit or the same tree, it's going to be genetically unique. So let's say you have a KSU Atwood pawpaw and you take those seeds, you're not going to get KSU Atwood pawpaws from those seeds. You're going to get a new variety that's going to have new genetics, that's going to be slightly different from the parent, and every single seed off that tree is going to produce a fruit or a tree slightly different than the parent, and they're all going to be compatible. So grafted, is there anybody that doesn't know what grafted means? So, well, just one person, so I won't explain it. No, I'm just kidding. So grafting is basically, it's kind of like tree surgery. So let's say this is a seedling tree here, and what you would do to graft it is, there's different ways to do this, but the way that I do it is you clip the tree, like let's say halfway, and then you take a twig off of, say, a KSU Atwood tree, and you cut it a certain way, you cut the rootstock a certain way, you connect them, and they fuse together. And then what happens is, if it's done properly, the little scion buds, and its vascular system is now connected to the vascular system of the rootstock, so they're fused together, and it'll sprout, and it'll grow into an exact clone of whatever tree the twig came from. So that's grafted. And this is not GMO, this is not hybrid, this is grafting. And people have been doing this since Egyptian times, if not earlier. So I get asked that too. So people have tried every possible way to propagate pawpaws via cuttings, and it just doesn't work. So there is a lab over in Europe that claims to have done it via tissue culturing, but they have like lab conditions. It's extremely complicated, and maybe they were making it up. I don't know, but you can't just take cuttings and get them to root. So I really wish you could, because that would make my life way easier. So pawpaws can be planted about 6 feet apart, up to about 15 feet apart. You don't want to plant them too far apart, or you will be limiting the opportunities for pollinators, which are quite the bumbling crew, to pollinate the trees. So you want to put them closer for better pollination. KSU recommends about 8 to 10 feet. But you can really crowd them together too. Like, you can even plant them 5 or 6 feet apart, and they'll roll with that. So pawpaws should not be planted on limestone, in mucky or swamp-like locations with poor drainage, or in the shade if possible. They will survive and probably produce fruit in the shade, but it's going to really lower the yields quite a bit. So the first 2 locations will stunt or kill the trees, like a limestone, with very thin soils, or mucky swamp conditions. And again, shade will lower the yield. So half a day of shade, half a day of direct sun works fine. But full sun is probably ideal as far as fruit production goes. So a slightly acidic pH is ideal. Around 5 to 7 works well. High organic matter, decent to strong soil fertility is best. They are a heavy feeder. And they do require irrigation while establishing, unless the summer is very wet and there's no drought conditions. But the safest plan is to have an irrigation plan or ability to deeply water the trees the first season or 2. So do expect to water them the first couple seasons. And if you plant them out and you don't have a watering plan and we get into a drought, the trees can die from that. So interesting to note is that pawpaws are not negatively affected by black walnut trees or juglone. So juglone is the compound that black walnut trees exude through their roots and through their leaves and fruits. It affects a lot of other crops like tomatoes, vegetables, other fruit trees. But pawpaws being native, they have adapted to not be affected by that. So we're going to talk about obtaining quality trees. So many nurseries out there sell undersized and poor quality trees. So you have to be very careful where you source from. So you always want to check nursery reviews, investigate a nursery before you buy trees from them. So I bought pawpaw trees from probably 10 to 12 different nurseries over the years. And generally what I got was very disappointing because they were very, very tiny. And they may be even grafted, but they're like 6 or 8 inches tall. And you can tell that the nursery was just grafting them as soon as they possibly could graft them. And that's not really ideal. The tree should be at least about 2 years old and should be about 1 to 2 feet tall at least. They should have a good, well filled out root system. Feeder roots are what matter most. A taproot's not essential to the health or longevity of the tree, and pawpaws can also regenerate a taproot. I've seen that before. I've seen the taproot get broken or cut off, and I've seen the tree try to regenerate it. And sometimes I get these alarmed messages from people like, but your trees are grown in pots, they don't have taproots. What's going to happen? And in my opinion and observation, the taproot is sort of a survival mechanism where the tree will quickly shoot out a taproot that anchors it to the soil so that in the riparian zone or forest where it's growing, it's not going to get washed away by a big rainstorm. So it's not essential to fruit production or survival, especially in an orchard setting. So it's advised to only buy potted pawpaw trees and avoid bare root pawpaws. So pawpaws have delicate root systems, easily damaged by transplant shock. I have successfully transplanted bare root trees before, but the roots are very, very sensitive and kind of brittle, and you're going to see a lot of transplant shock and tree death if you are focusing on planting bare root pawpaw trees. So healthy pawpaw trees have large green leaves, and anything less signifies a compromised tree. So you can see these leaves here, at least 7 or 8 inches long, nice and big and green, even on that little tree. So genetics matter. The top fruit is from superior genetics. The bottom is an average wild fruit. And sometimes, like I said, wild fruits can be excellent, but where you source the trees from matters in the long run if large, tasty fruit is your goal. So here's another superior selection with large, delicious fruit. So most grafted named cultivars in nurseries. That's a little bit gibberish there. I was up at 9 o'clock last night doing this on the fly. Seedlings from excellent parent trees will often also produce similar quality fruit. So basically what I was going for there is that pawpaw trees, I think it's, what's the name? Maybe you know this, Dr. Pomper. Is it homozygous? Say it. Yeah, so they don't differ, the genetics don't differ that much from the parent tree. So generally, like let's say you have an A+ pawpaw tree, if you plant those seeds, you're probably going to have B to A+ fruit come out of it. So if you have a tree that produces really small fruits, the genetics aren't going to vary that much. It's probably going to produce low quality fruit. Could be good for rootstock, but you're not going to get great quality fruit from genetics that aren't good. So you want to really focus on either getting excellent quality seedlings or grafted trees of named varieties that you know are good. So we're going to talk a little bit about planting. Here's another one of my epic drawings. And pawpaw trees require careful transplanting. So be really careful not to disturb the root system at all. You dig the hole 3 times as large as the pot. I like to score the sides of the hole with a spade, so I kind of jab into it to fracture the bottom and the sides. And then you want to carefully slide the tree out of the pot before placing the root ball in the hole. And then you want to place the root ball in the hole gently, and then fill in gently with loose soil and water and heavily. So if your soil is really heavy and is like clumpy clay kind of stuff, you either want to break that up into more of a fine aggregate, or you could even refill it with some garden soil or something like that. But it just needs to be soil, native soil, okay? You don't want to add anything to the planting hole. So I've had people ask me over the years about all kinds of stuff. You don't want to add any fertilizers, no manure, no potting soil, no Miracle-Gro, no compost. Don't add anything into the hole with the tree. Just put it in, put in soil, give it lots of water. Okay, so compost and fertilizers and stuff, that can all go on the top layer, and earthworms and biology is going to move that in. Just like in the forest, you think the humus layer is on top, and the earthworms work that humus into the soil. So no peat moss or anything either. It's not necessary. So you can finishing the planting involves applying thick mulch and some tree protection. So I really like to use flattened plain cardboard under the mulch layer because that cardboard kills all the grass and most weeds underneath, and then you put your organic matter on top of that. And that does a much better job than just putting mulch on top of the soil. And then you want to use welded chicken wire secured onto a metal stake, and that's going to protect the tree from string trimmers and deer. Okay, so deer don't feed on pawpaw trees, but they will get curious and nibble on them sometimes. So they will nip a few buds off, and you don't want that. What they will do, though, is they'll rub their antlers on the trunk, and this will tear the bark off. They like that nice, smooth bark on the pawpaw, and they'll tear the bark off, and that will devastatingly damage the tree. So it's really good to, at least the first few years, have chicken wire. So this is like your regular chicken wire here, but I've since gone to welded chicken wire. So welded chicken wire is like squares and not circles, and it's just much more rigid and strong. And then you want to secure it to, this is like a metal post for electric fencing. So those work great. You could also use a T-post. You could use, a piece of rebar or whatever. Did you have a question? Okay. Okay, right. So if you don't want to use organic mulch or you don't have access to it, you can also use landscape fabric. So that's like the woven landscape fabric material, and that works great for keeping weeds and grass away from the trees long term. So as you can see here, this mulch was in place for maybe 6 months. You've already got wild violets and all sorts of weeds starting to creep in. So most of my trees have landscape fabric on them at this point because I have hundreds of pawpaw trees. I don't have the ability to organically mulch them constantly throughout the year. So I use landscape fabric, and that works great. So if the tree's under 2 feet tall or so, you can put shade cloth or layers of cheesecloth over the cage to protect it from UV. I think technically we say about 18 inches. After the point where they get about 18 inches tall, they seem to be resistant to UV. But a little tree like that, if you put it out in the full sun, will sometimes get sunburned. And grafted trees seem a little more resistant to that, but seedling trees will get fried in the full sun. And so the first couple of years, they have to grow in a shaded environment.
Could you do a pot for the first few years, and then how big a pot would you recommend to sustain it for that long?
If you're growing it from seed. So the pots that we use in the nursery are 9 inches deep by about 3 inches or something. They're not huge. And they can stay in there for at least 2 years. Now the catch with that is that if the pawpaw tree in the pot, if the pot freezes solid in the wintertime, it'll kill the tree. So what you have to do is allow the tree to go dormant, like get frosted on a few times, and then you can put it into a cold storage facility, like an unheated garage or something like that, where it's going to stay cold but not freeze. Or you can do what I did one year, and that's just bury the entire pot in the ground, and the ground in Kentucky will generally not freeze that deep, and it'll insulate them. Questions?
This is kind of just a personal thing. Someone gave me like 20 pawpaw seeds a couple years ago. I didn't really do much research, but they germinated all well. I planted them. Like, okay, a little bit of shade for them when they're little, so I let them live in a pot for a year. I had them all in 1 gallon pots, and they did really well. Pulled them out, got one of those huge, crazy, bottom twisted around. Man, I gotta get these out of the pot, so I put them in the ground. I just didn't really put them in very ideal spots, and some of them really close together, and they spent all this year there. And I'm just wondering what the likelihood of survival would be if I were to dig some of those up and try to transplant them into some better spots that started in pots, then planted.
So they've been in the ground for 1 season?
Yeah.
Probably not a huge deal. Generally, you want to dig them up. What's recommended is like when they're just starting to bud. So like April or something, you can go out there and dig them up. But if you do it carefully, and if you do it really carefully and you're not hacking up the roots, and then you transplant them carefully and give them tons of water, they'll probably be okay if they've only been in the ground 1 year. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Do the grafted trees, do they sucker really bad?
They do sucker also. So generally, you can just take that down with a string trimmer, lawnmower, or something. They're really fleshy for the first season, so you can just cut them down. They're usually pretty close to the tree. They generally don't go that far outside of the canopy, from what I've seen. Even in an older tree that I've seen sucker profusely, they're usually not more than maybe 10 feet from the trunk or something like that. Do you think so?
Yeah, from 10 to 15 feet.
Yeah. Yeah, a full-size tree. So the first few years when they sucker, they're just going to be like basically right at the base of the tree. And you can graft onto those suckers too. So, so if you have some suckers that are growing a few feet away, you can graft onto those and then have another tree there of a different variety. So basically, this is what you're going for. If the pawpaw tree is there in the middle, you're going to want a weed-free, grass-free mulch zone. So that includes either landscape fabric or organic mulch. But you want about 2 to 3 feet around the tree. You want a very generous area that doesn't have any grass or any weed competition, because any amount of grass or weeds are going to be sucking up nutrients, water, and grass puts carbon dioxide in the soil, which is going to starve the roots of oxygen. So you want to have no competition for the young tree at all. When the trees are more established, 8 or 10 years down the road, grass is okay underneath them. But for the first few years, you want to be totally grass-free. Was there a question? Okay. Uh-huh. Oh, okay. I just keep doing that. All right, so pawpaws require careful transplant of potted trees. You don't want to add anything into the planting hole except native soil or garden soil if your soil is extremely heavy. You also want to remove stones. You can add compost and mulch on top. And pawpaws cannot compete with grass or weeds for the first 5 to 6 years. And you add a welded chicken wire cage to protect the trees. So don't skimp on the last step, especially if you have deer pressure. But even string trimmers or landscaping crews, they will annihilate your fruit trees faster than anything else. So spend that extra $5 or $10 and get a nice chicken wire cage and a stake around the tree. So we're going to talk about pawpaw pollination. Uh-huh.
First of all, we bought several pawpaws from Facebook area from you all, and you all sent wonderful instructions. I mean, it is so thorough, and our pawpaws are so very happy that I think they probably need to be pruned. Do you have any general guidelines on pruning?
Sure. So with pruning with pawpaws, it's basically, it's not down to an exact science, because there's still some things that we don't know about how the trees react long term. But there are some basic parameters. So I don't go into this in the talk, so I'll just have to kind of explain it here. So basically, you're going to remove any suckers. So that's anything that's coming from underground around the trees. It's also anything that's going to be below the graft union. So the graft union is where the trees were surgically connected. You're going to see that little seam there for the first few years. Anything below that is going to be rootstock. So any little green shoots that come out, you can just strip those off with your hands. And generally with most fruit trees, including pawpaws, if they make this sort of U-shaped, kind of like tuning fork shape like this, that's really fragile, and one of those branches is going to snap off eventually. So if they have that really strong kind of fork shape like this, it's really recommended to take one of those off as early as possible. So pawpaws don't heal that well from big pruning cuts. So any pruning you do, you want to do when the branches are as small as possible. Like if you can do it when they're pencil size or smaller, that's best. If you're sitting there sawing them with a saw, they don't heal from that very well. Like an apple tree kind of seals over, a pear tree, they don't do that well. So you want to avoid any major cuts. KSU generally recommends topping the trees at about 8 to 10 feet, right? Yeah. So, pawpaw trees will eventually, they'll get, 15, 20 feet tall. So if you want to make it easy to get the fruit, it's good to top the trees. So you can top them at about 8 to 10 feet, and that makes the picking of the fruit easier, keeps the trees smaller. Anything that breaks off or that looks diseased or something, you can cut that off too. So that's basically what we do. And will sometimes train the branches. So if I'm getting that really strong kind of V or U shape like I was talking about, I'll get a string and kind of pull the one side. I'll weigh it down or stake it down so it's going more at a 45-degree angle so that I don't have to cut it off later. But you have to do that when they're small or you'll just snap it off. So that's basically what it is. So pawpaws bloom in April to early May. The blossoms are frost sensitive. So some years in Kentucky, pawpaw blossoms will get destroyed by frost. So the last couple of years, we've had some late frost issues, and I've had almost zero crop at my farm for the last couple of years because of that. But thankfully, pawpaws put out a secondary flush of blooms if the first set gets destroyed. So they'll still get about a 50% crop or so in the event that this occurs. Would you say that number's about right? Yeah. So pawpaws are not pollinated by bees. So rather flies, fruit flies, ants, ladybugs, spiders, and other insects pollinate the flowers. So the pollen is really nutritious, and it attracts a lot of insects in the early spring, but not bees. So contrary to what some people say on the internet, the flowers do not smell bad. Yeah, they smell slightly yeasty, like they don't smell great, but they just smell kind of like yeast, and this attracts flies that spread the pollen. Some people hang fly attractants in the orchard at the time of bloom, which seems like a good idea. Banana peels and raw bacon work great, so you can just throw that over the branches if you want. So these are some of the different stages of the pawpaw bloom. So this is about what they look like right now, or actually what they'll look like here in about 6 weeks or so. They'll start to swell. Then they get larger and green and velvety like this. Then you start to see a differentiation of the petals like this. And they get bigger petals, and sepals start to form like this. They open up. And this is what they look like when they're in full bloom. We'll go into that more here in a moment. And then this is what the young fruit looks like. So if you see this, it may or may not have successfully pollinated. It may fall off. But once you see them like this and they start to look like little bananas, then you know that that's most likely going to mature. And then you're really good when you start to see that. So this is like early, like around June 1st or so, they're going to start to look like this. And so I will mention that if you want to get the largest, best quality fruit, you can also thin the fruits out. So similar to as you do on apples, you could thin this out to just one fruit or two fruits. And there are some advantages to that. You have to be careful. I would use like a pair of like sharp snips. You could snip those off and just leave one. But there are some advantages to that, because when you have a multi-cluster fruit like this, there's only one stem, and there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 fruits on it. So what that means is the flesh is gonna rip when they fall off. So it's not gonna have a stem attached. So similar to like when you get avocados at the store, if you can get them with the little stem still attached, they're less likely to start rotting there. So similarly, when the pawpaw comes off of the pedicle, it's gonna rip the flesh a little bit, and that's an area where it can start to decompose there faster. So if you only have one fruit and you have a stem attached, it makes the fruit slightly more marketable and has a better shelf life. So pawpaw trees are hermaphroditic, meaning they possess both male and female flower parts. Okay, so sometimes there's a misconception that some trees are male, some trees are female, but they're not. The flowers, they develop at 2 distinct stages to avoid self-pollination. So this is the first stage, and this is the pollen receptive stage. So these are the little sepals in here, and these are the pollen, the pistils that'll have pollen on them. So right now this is receptive to pollen, and it's if you look closely at the flower, you can see these are shiny and kind of sticky where the pollen will stick, and these are still white and undeveloped. Then this is the ripe pollen stage. So at this point, the ovaries are no longer viable to receive pollen, and the pistils have developed pollen. So they've got all kinds of pollen in here. That's what these little white grains are everywhere. So that's when they release their pollen. And this happens from here to here, takes about maybe 3 days. So it doesn't take very long.
Is that why you actually need more than one? Is it because their time is different?
Well, it seems like they're not even receptive to their own pollen. But yeah, you need two for cross-pollination. So most pawpaw trees are not self-fertile. There are some claims here and there that some varieties are self-fertile. But even a self-fertile tree is going to get a lower yield than a tree that's been pollinated. So again, they need cross-pollination, and I explained that earlier. So due to the need for cross-pollination, I always suggest planting at least 3 trees. That way, if one dies on you or falls over in a storm or somehow gets killed, you're not stuck with a single tree with no cross-pollination, because then you'd have to plant another tree, and it might be 4 or 5 years before it's got pollen to cross-pollinate the other one. So pawpaw trees can be hand-pollinated for maximum fruit set, and this is quite easy, but takes a little bit of time. So what you do is you would collect the flowers in the pollen shed stage when they are in their male stage, and they've got pollen, like I showed you earlier. The inside's going to be brown. And you pluck those off the tree. You can put them in a Ziploc bag or something, or a yogurt container or something, and you take them to a genetically different tree. Then the pollen must be applied to flowers in the pollen receptive stage, the female stage. So we'll look at these one more time. So this is the stage when it's going to be receptive to pollen, when the pistils are white and the stigmas are nice and green and shiny. And then this is the stage when you collect them for cross-pollination. So they're going to be brown, and there's going to be the white pollen in there. There's a little ladybug covered in pollen hiding over there. So they're going to have pollen, and this is when you pluck them off and you take them to flowers like that. And so basically what you're going to do is peel all those petals off carefully, and you're going to have a little stem with a little ball of pollen, and you're just going to gently paint that onto that other flower to get that pollen all over the place. So you can also do this with a paintbrush, like a camel hair, a really tiny, soft camel hair paintbrush you can do that with. So you could take the male flowers and you could kind of break them apart and dust all the pollen into like a little container, like maybe a yogurt container or something, and then you just take a little paintbrush, you get the pollen in it, and then you paint the female flowers with the pollen. So this can actually lead to excess fruit set because it's so effective, and that can actually break the branches off the tree. So you want to be careful that you don't have so much fruit that the branches are bending over and lowering down like they're going to get broken off, because they will break off sometimes. So in summary, the blooms are not frost hardy. You need at least 2 genetically different pawpaw trees for cross-pollination. Pawpaws are pollinated by flies, ants, spiders, and beetles. And hand pollination will result in maximum fruit set. We're going to talk about maintaining pawpaw trees. So, healthy pawpaw trees grow fast, okay? There's a bit of a misconception that they take forever to grow. That's just because the trees you're planting aren't very good, and you're probably not taking very good care of them. So if you have a good, strong, healthy tree, and you're taking good care of it, they grow fairly fast, actually. The first year you put them in the ground, you're probably not going to see much of any growth. They may just kind of sit there the first year. So after the first year, they should grow fairly fast under good conditions. They're going to put on 12 to 18 inches of growth a year. But they require adequate sun, fertility, and soil moisture. So after 3 to 4 years of strong growth, they should be around head height or so. And grafted trees bloom when they're anywhere from about 3 to 5 feet tall. A seedling is going to start blooming when it's around 6 feet or so. And you'll notice healthy growth has this almost kind of menorah-like growth pattern to it. So you're going to have wide angles with nice big branches like this, and tree's going to grow pretty rapidly. So this is what I'm talking about. You've got strong, wide-angled branches here, really nice, huge green leaves. This is a sign of a really healthy, strong-growing tree. So pawpaws under poor conditions are going to look small, twiggy, and grow very slow. So they don't usually seem to recover from major shock or damage like this. So if you have a tree and it's been in the ground for years and it still looks like it has little short, kind of pathetic looking little twigs on it, and it's all twiggy and bonsai looking, it should really just be replaced. It's not really going to recover from that most of the time. And that can occur because of a poor planting site, damage to the tree, lack of water fertility, or you started with poor quality trees. So remember that maintenance of pawpaw trees means keeping all grass and weeds away from the trees for the first 5 years at least to really let them establish. So that means no grass, not just mowed or trimmed grass, but no grass. And you want to mulch the trees heavily annually or use landscape fabric. So pawpaws require strong fertility. So chicken manure, that's kind of my go-to fertilizer for trees in the orchard. I buy bags of granulated chicken manure. Fish emulsion works well. I've gotten to really, really like this water-soluble fertilizer. So I get this from Seven Springs Farm, and I'm extremely happy with this stuff. It dissolves completely in water. It's made out of soybeans. And it doesn't have any kind of gross qualities to it, like fish emulsion is a little gross to work with. This is not. And the fact that it's water soluble, it doesn't clog emitters, it doesn't clog drip tape, it doesn't clog any type of misting system or anything. It just flows right like water. And you will not see better growth on anything than using this stuff. So it's amazing stuff. And you can put it through a fertigation system. You can do it by hand. So you want to fertilize every June and July or so. And one thing I learned, I talked about this in the class yesterday, that I learned the hard way, that you only want to fertilize trees after all danger of frost. Because if you go in there and you start hitting up trees with fertilizer in April, that can stimulate them to put out a flush of growth, and then you have a late frost and it just burns it all off, and it can really set the trees back. So only fertilize after all danger of frost, which is basically the first week of May, except in 2020 when it wasn't. So, the halfway through May, really. So June and July is a great time to do it. And you don't want to fertilize too late in the season, like say August or September, because then that's going to stimulate more growth possibly that could not harden off into wood and end up getting fried when it freezes in a few months. So when pawpaws are around 5 years old or so, they should be painted to reflect the winter sun and prevent southwest injury. Okay, so southwest injury is basically the southwest side of the tree is what gets the most direct sun. So in the wintertime, let's say in weather like this or on a sunny day, it can warm up that bark on the southwest side of the tree and cause sap to flow. Then it drops super cold at night. All that sap is still flowing in the tree, and it cracks it open. So this is one that's been damaged by southwest injury. You see this big crack here where it's opened up. So of course this is very, very hard on the trees and damages them severely. So if you put a little bit of white paint, especially on that southwest side, that's going to reflect the sun and prevent that from happening. So I basically paint all fruit trees now, not just pawpaw trees, but apples, pears, etc. So when you want to paint the trees, you want to do a 50-50 blend of indoor latex paint and water. So why indoor latex paint? Because outdoor latex paint can often contain pesticides and UV stabilizers, and you don't want those chemicals going on your trees. There are organic options also. This is one of the only things that is not considered organic standard that I would use. They do make organic paint. It's, I think the Milk Paint Company is where you can get this from. And I've bought that and used that in the past when I was certified. So you want to paint when temps are well above freezing. You can paint any time. I wouldn't do it in the middle of the winter, and then it might be too late anyway. But basically, autumn's fine, summer. You can also do it in a sprayer. So you can put a backpack sprayer, spray it on. I don't think you need to reapply it every year, but probably like every 2 to 3.
Probably about every other year. And
Yeah.
I've got to say, please do this if you got pawpaw trees, because we've lost more pawpaw trees to death because of this injury than anything else. So.
Yeah. And it might also help with other insects like ambrosia beetles boring into the tree. It might assist with that too. And you can also infuse the paint with anti-insect oils like neem or clove oil or something like that. So to summarize, healthy pawpaw trees grow little the first year, but once they get going, they should be putting on 12 to 18 inches a year. Anything less than that is really showing the tree's compromised, so it's either not getting enough water, it's not getting enough fertility, the root system's damaged, something like that. They're heavy feeders and should be fertilized about 2 times per year, June and July. They should be painted. And you want to have no grass or weeds anywhere near the trees.
On your fertilization, do you have recommendations for like trunk caliber size to fertilization rates?
That'd be a great question for KSU. They have data on that. So if you comb through their files, or it's in the Pawpaw book too. I don't have it all memorized. That'd probably be impressive if I did. I'd be like, yeah, when they're 3 inches, 3 pounds. All right, diseases and insects. Okay, so are pawpaws free of diseases and insects? No. Okay, so I don't think they're saying it that much anymore, but a few years ago in nursery catalogs, they'd be like, pawpaw trees are immune to every disease and insect. No, not quite. They are immortal beings made of flesh. So they have actually lots of insects and diseases, but most of them aren't a huge deal. These are Asimina webworms. We're going to talk about those a little bit. So urban locations are usually going to suffer less pests and diseases. This is due to the lack of wild pawpaw trees that'll host diseases and insects and then migrate to pawpaw planting. So if you're in the middle of a concrete jungle and there's not a pawpaw tree for 30 miles, then you're not going to have endemic insects and diseases that are going to migrate over, unlike at my farm. So I wanted to ask, actually, how many people are actively growing pawpaw trees here? Kind of, sort of. I saw a bunch of yeses and one kind of, sort of. And then how many people want to market pawpaws? All right. So this is Japanese beetle damage. So Japanese beetles do like to eat on the foliage, but they're usually not a huge deal. So this is the Asimina webworm, and this, last I heard, is not present at KSU, but I do have it on my farm. It just showed up randomly a few years ago. So it's a tent caterpillar, so it makes this really thick webbing and tent here, and the little caterpillars are protected by this tent, and it really causes a lot of damage, and it can even kill small trees. This is how you know it's there. You'll see this brown foliage. It kind of breaks down like a little teepee, and you can see it from a distance. So if in the summertime you see these brown leaves on the tree, it's almost for certain that you got tent caterpillars. There's a big fat one right there. And this is all their frass and debris that they leave. So what I do is I just tear those out of the trees as soon as I see them and just stomp them. It's pretty high tech. The other major insect pest is pawpaw pedicle borer. So I think it should be renamed pawpaw borer because it bores into everything, the twigs, the flowers, the fruit also. There's the little cocoon things that came out of. There's some damage from it also. So these insects burrow into all parts of the tree. and they lower yields, but they're usually not a huge problem. What would you say is the worst you've ever seen them?
One year we had like probably 2 or 3% of the fruit with infested, but we've never seen that again. So it's really it's just occasional.
Yeah. This is what the adult moth of the pawpaw pedicle borer looks like. So, while somewhat of a pest, the beautiful zebra swallowtail butterfly is a native insect and has a symbiotic relationship with pawpaw trees. It's the only food their larvae will eat. So they lay eggs from around May to August. I see these flying around, and they lay their eggs on the pawpaw leaves. And so they're only really an issue on small young trees. And what I do is I don't kill the caterpillars typically. I remove them, and then I just put them on more mature trees where they can just eat away, and they're not going to be damaging any small trees. And they're, of course, really beautiful, so it's nice to support their population too. The most problematic disease is probably Phylosticta, which is what we see here. This is a fairly severe case that makes this blotching on the fruit. If you're selling fruit and it has these splotches on it, you could just tell people those are sugar spots. That works for other things. The fungus causes blotches on the foliage and fruit. In severe cases, it even causes the skin of the fruit to crack and break open like this, and that makes the fruit pretty much inedible and definitely non-marketable.
Are you saying that the previous picture, that fruit would be edible and taste reasonable?
Probably, yeah. As long as it's just on the skin, it doesn't seem to affect the pulp. But once you get to this sort of stage and it cracks and stuff, then that's not going to fly. And it basically ruins the fruit before it ripens. So in my nursery, I destroy any seedlings showing sign of Phylosticta. So when I'm growing all the seedlings out, if I notice that any of them look like they're really blotchy on the leaves, I just throw them out and destroy it. So I'm trying to keep the trees that I sell at least somewhat resistant to Phylosticta. This is what a minor Phylosticta infection looks like. So, how to manage diseases in pawpaws. So you can plant varieties known to be disease resistant, if possible. You can plant healthy, strong trees to get them off to a good start. You can provide optimum conditions like good fertility, full sun, and good water and air drainage. And you might also consider some organic antifungal products. These aren't really they're not tested on pawpaws, and they're definitely not registered yet. But things like copper, sulfur, surround, compost tea, things like that are generally going to be good antifungals for other fruit trees. They're going to work just as well on pawpaws for the most part, as far as we know. Does anybody not know what surround is? So surround is an amazing product, actually. It's a white kaolin clay, so it's a food-safe clay, similar to the clay they put in toothpaste. And you put it in a backpack sprayer, mix it with water, and it looks like you painted the tree white. So whatever you spray it on, it's like white. But insects and fungus can't survive on this stuff. And so it's an amazing organic product to deter insects and fungus. Uh-huh.
I was just gonna share, I did use Arbor bioprotected, and my pawpaw, I didn't put it on all of it. My pawpaws that I didn't put it on are way happier than the ones that I did put Arbor bioprotected on. So I'm no expert about any means, but I would not do
You're saying copper?
Arbor bioprotected.
Yes. Uh-huh.
It's an organic
Uh-huh.
antifungal.
Yeah.
So I tried it. Other trees were fine, but the pawpaws were not.
Mm-hmm. With those trees won't be under any warranty now because you did that. She said that there's a copper. What is it called again?
It's arbor, like tree arbor bioprotectant.
Arbor bioprotectant. It's a copper-based thing, and she said that she didn't have good results using that. So we don't know why. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was too strong of a concentration. So like I said, these are untested, but you might try some of them out. Copper and sulfur are going to be the two harshest ones, right? But then there's BT products. They're antifungal. Compost tea is going to be super gentle. Surround's going to be super gentle. So I've never found them necessary in my orchard, but I know KSU's had some pretty severe issues of Phylosticta over the years. So just something to keep in mind. So full info on this topic is available in my book. So while pawpaw trees are not free of challenges, in general, they're much easier to grow than peaches and apples, which are highly prone to disease and issues. So pawpaws have their fair share, but in general, they're going to be a lot easier. So these are my top picks. I get asked this question a lot. So I really like the KSU varieties a lot, and I'm not just saying that because Kirk Pomper's here, but KSU Atwood, KSU Benson, KSU Chappelle, they're all really super great varieties. I really like 1-4, which is unreleased, and Pina Colada, which are unreleased. Susquehanna and other Peterson releases are all really good. There's a local one from Berea called Naomi's Delicious. It's a really early fruit. It's quite good quality. And also, there's a few of these other ones here. Some of these are releases from our nursery. Some are some older types, NC1 and Sunflower. The Jerry Lehman varieties are likely some of the best, but I have limited experience eating them, so I can't vouch for them too strongly, but I just know that they get really good reviews. And we do sell those in our nursery. And the Walker selections are also good and get really high ratings, like Tropical Treat. And he's got a newer one called Kentucky Legend. So we got... Yes, I've got a huge listing of them in the book, except for the ones I just released that were post-book. So some guy came and he shot a little video at our nursery here. If I can get it working here. We're going to watch this for a couple minutes, and then we'll close out with some questions. Apparently there's no volume. Is there volume on this? Really thick, durable skin. This is Susquehanna. Like, I mean, I'm putting a lot of pressure on that, and it's not breaking or anything. You know, even rubbing a knife on it just barely cuts into it, which is really nice because a lot of times pawpaws have such fragile skin that just with a little bit of pressure, it tears open. So you can see that's got really nice thick skin, or thick flesh in there. It's got a little bit of bruising from where it fell off the tree. That's what that is. Yeah. It's a little bit of bruising. You can see there's hardly any seeds in this variety. Sometimes the seeds will even be like little aborts. And the seeds are also freestone, so they just come right out. Just pop right out. But really thick flesh, really tasty. It's got a rich flavor, very, very sweet. So I'm Blake Cothron, and this is Peaceful Heritage Nursery and Farm. Yep. And so we're going to be taking a look at some of the fruit plantings here today and some of our pawpaw trees and other things that we grow here at the nursery. Cool. Yeah, so this is the intermittent mist system that I built where we propagate plants for the nursery. And so it's about half empty right now because half of them have rooted and been removed from it, and it's also October now, so it's starting to kind of phase out. Yep. As you can see, there's nice root systems already forming on these little bitty cuttings. Like the cutting's so small you can hardly even see it, but it's got huge roots. Yeah. So these are some of our grafted varieties. This is Sri Vishnu. That is one that we developed in our nursery here. This is Windstar. That's a Cliff England variety that he named. We got Horns White here. This is a white pawpaw, and really high in demand.
I got a few of these in my yard now. I noticed people are looking for them, so.
There's something about that particular variety that everybody seems to want that one. Got KSU Chappelle, some more Horns White. We've secured the graft union here. There, you can see there's the paraffin film from the grafting, and then we have it secured to the stake to keep it nice and strong. Yeah. See, we got goji too. Yeah, we got a lot of stuff going on here. Figs, gojis, gooseberries, mulberry trees.
This is the pawpaw house.
Yeah, things are starting to yellow just a little bit with the seasonal change. Showing these. So these are our ultra select pawpaw seedlings, and so these are about 18 months from seed. And they are starting to turn a little yellow for the year because it's October now. And so we'll take a look at the root system on our pawpaw trees. If I can even get the pot off. There's so many roots.
And they air clean as they go over the pot. That's super healthy. Look at that.
So look at all those roots. I don't know if you've gotten pawpaw trees from other nurseries, but
Yeah.
they usually don't have roots like this.
Exactly.
And not tops like this too. That's only 18 months from seed.
Yeah, that's
And this
beautiful.
is, 3 feet tall here. And so we graft on these, and we also sell them as ultra select seedlings because these are superior genetics from some of the best pawpaws available in the world today.
Yeah.
So these should grow out and be superior fruit producers, and they also make great rootstock. And this is what we graft onto the nursery. So these rows here there's over 100 pawpaw trees in here, and these are all different mixed varieties that we'll be using for propagation material for the nursery.
Yeah.
And so I planted them closer together to fit in as many trees as possible because I'm not interested in letting the trees grow really big. I'm not even interested in fruit production on this. I'm just interested in the genetics that are here. We've got KSU varieties, we've got Peterson varieties, we've got ones that are from different growers. This is Canopus.
Ah, that
That's-
one I'm looking for.
That one's from Iowa.
Yeah, wonderful. Canopus is heavy bearer.
Yeah, it's a kind of odd name.
Yeah.
This is KSU Benson from KSU. This is Potomac from Neil Peterson.
Yep.
KSU Atwood from Kentucky State. This is 275-17. I think that's the Jerry Lehman one.
Yep.
This I think is a Chappelle. Yeah, this is KSU Chappelle, which grows faster and bigger than any, gets big faster than any other pawpaw tree I've ever seen. It was planted at the same time as all the ones we've just looked at, and you can see it's just like 3 times as big.
I noticed I grafted that this year. It grew very quickly.
Yeah, it grows really quickly. This is Tay2. That's an old heirloom, or practically heirloom variety. Has a nice flavor. This is one of our ultra select seedlings. So I have a few of these planted out here. This should be taken note of. This is a Semina webworm damage. And so you see they've got this little brown teepee. There's some frass and droppings in there.
Yep.
This is a Semina webworm. And so they cause a lot of damage. And I have to go through, these show up in August. You can see all the webbing in there. And these show up in August here, and they'll make these little tents, and they'll really do a lot of damage. There's the damage to the wood where they ate the bark there, and so that's shot. So that just has to be pruned off. So what I do is I rip all those little brown little tents off, and then have to destroy those to keep the population of these under control. SU 7-1. Oh no, sorry. This is KSU 1-4,
1-4.
which
yeah.
is absolutely amazing. Should be released and named. This is Marshmallow, Tallahatchie from Neil Peterson.
Yep.
Green River Bell. This is an old Kentucky heirloom.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed that was interesting this year was that we had these late frost issues here, which are kind of a big issue all over the country these days with climate change and whatever. And so pawpaws are susceptible to damage by late frost. They'll oftentimes put out a secondary flush of buds if the first flush gets damaged or burned off by frost. And I noticed that the only varieties that produced fruit this year were varieties that originated in Kentucky. So, we're in Kentucky, and Green River Bell, Naomi's Delicious, KSU Chappelle, and another variety from Kentucky all produced fruit, and they were pretty much the only ones that did. And you can see these are next year's flower buds that are already forming on there.
Next year's buds.
These are leaf buds. These are flower buds. So yeah, this is what pawpaw trees look like when they're left to their own devices and grown a little bigger. Yeah, these are our ultra select seedlings out here mostly.
Yeah.
So these are seedling trees, and we're evaluating the fruit quality and everything on these. So this is Sri Vishnu, and this is one of our ultra select seedlings that became a named variety and produces some really nice quality fruit. It's definitely got characteristics of Susquehanna and sunflower, which are its two parents.
It's evident in the flavor, like when you eat it. Tastes like sunflower.
And the texture. Well, it's got a thick texture like Susquehanna, very few seeds. You can see the leaves resemble Susquehanna too.
Yeah, quilted.
Kind of quilted and round.
Yeah, very nice.
So, do you want to taste some pawpaw pulp? Has anybody ever tasted pawpaw before, or never tasted it? Oh yeah, a lot of people in the room. So I have some frozen pulp that's from some KSU selections, and does everybody have a little wooden popsicle stick? So here's how we're gonna do this. You're gonna dip into that, no double dipping, and just get a little taste of that. And this is very high quality pulp. So we're gonna pass this around. That's not something I've done, but what I've found in my research is that it's good to do that when they're just starting to bud out. So like when they're just barely starting to show the buds are swelling up, as carefully as possible, dig them up, transplant them, give them tons of water, mulch, and you'd probably want to water them like all summer long because they'll barely have any roots when you do that. So it can be done, but again, you don't know what the genetics are. But if you find one in the wild that you think is really good, you can always take cuttings and then graft it. Yep.
Blake,
Yes.
yesterday during your berry class, I'm over here.
Okay. I just heard this
Yesterday
voice.
during your berry class, you mentioned that you always want to buy bare root, and I understand why with pawpaws that you wouldn't want to do that. But can you speak towards the steps that you take to keep from having weeds and insects spread when selling your pawpaw trees?
Yes. So what she's talking about is like biosecurity. So I mentioned in my previous class that you want to be careful when you source plants from other nurseries that are grown in pots, because in the pot can be insects, weeds, weed seeds, etc. So what I do in my nursery is I try to keep everything really strong with really strong hygiene. So I don't allow weeds to grow in the nursery at all. So the plants are going to be generally completely weed free. They're not going to, it's just basically a sterile potting mix that I use. So there's not going to be any like diseases or insect larvae or anything in there. There's really no soil. It's just basically peat moss and vermiculite and all that. So it's very clean what you're going to get from our nursery. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
In the video,
Yes.
there was grass and stuff around the trees.
Uh-huh.
I'm saying once you plant them, you don't have to worry about, it's only when you're growing them in the nursery or what?
Right. Once the first couple of years, you want to have landscape fabric or mulch around the tree so there's zero weeds. So in the orchard, it may have looked like there was grass and stuff around it, but actually there's a square of landscape fabric around the perimeter of the tree. But I can't keep it like a golf course, so things get growing, but they're not right next to the tree. So they're going to be at least 18 inches or something away. And so you're at least giving a buffer where you have a weed-free zone around the tree. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? So the pawpaw book is available here outside. One of these tables has it for sale. And also the berry grower. And this is the nursery information where you can contact us. I also passed out some business cards. That's our phone number. Email is a great way to get a hold of me. You can ask me any questions via email. You can also find us on Instagram and our YouTube channel, which is Peaceful Heritage Nursery on YouTube. So I put informational videos on there about pawpaws, fruit trees, other things involving organic agriculture. Any other questions before we go? All right, well, thank you all so much for coming today, and hope you all learned something useful.